As you go through life, you will inevitably face external forces that try to push and pull you out of your alignment. This could show up in many ways. It could be a good friend of yours who tries to invite you to go do something that your inner self knows is not right. It could be an opportunity presents itself that is going to give you something you really want, but you know that it's not really what you should be doing. It could be a cultural pressure. It could be the external world saying, hey, you're supposed to act this way in order to fit in. And we all need to do that to some degree, but when you overcompensate too much to fit in, it starts to warp and shape who you become. The external force that our physical body is constantly contending with is, can you guess? Gravity. As we go through life, every moment of every second, gravity is constantly trying to pull us down into the ground. And eventually, it's gonna win. At the end of the day, we all end up losing to gravity. However, through proper intention and proper tensioning, it is possible to do better in the long term. And we all know this because you've seen that 80-year-old person who's hunched over, walking like this. And then you've seen that 80-year-old person who's still running, still active, still holding their chest tall. So what is it that sets the difference? It's your integrity. So when it comes to creating a win-win relationship on our physical level with this external force of gravity that we contend with, the most important thing is to optimize your alignment. So to start, let's talk about how in a standing posture we can find an optimal balanced relationship to the force of gravity. And one way you can think about your body is like a form of architecture. We want to stack for ideal force distribution. So to begin, what we're gonna do is we're just gonna bring our feet directly underneath our hips. Not too wide, not too close together, right? If they're too close together, you get a shearing force. If they're too wide, gravity is caving you in. But when you stack the hip in line with the knee, in line with the ankle, you optimize this relationship. From there, we're going to turn the outer edges of our feet in line slightly. This is something that you'll notice often, is that people might tend to stand with one foot more turned out than the other, or maybe both foot turned out. Sometimes people pigeon toe. I'm sure you've seen that before. We want to line our heels up with our toes, so maybe a little more externally rotated than you're used to. From there, I want you to begin to just bend your knees slightly. Now again, we don't want to hyper bend, right? Because if we bend, we lose that alignment. But we also don't want to lock the joint out, because if we lock the joint out, we are no longer using our muscular fiber to support that knee joint. So what you're going to do, with your feet directly underneath your hips and your heels in line with your toes, you are just going to lock your knees out all the way and then bend them one click forward. It's just a one click motion. Perfect, right there. Next, we need to talk about our hips. Your hips matter a lot, right? Why is that? It's because in everything we do in life, we want to prioritize our spine. In many ways, your spine is you. What I mean by that, if you hurt your hand, if you hurt your arm, right? You're hurt. But if you hurt your spine, you're fucked, right? It's the central column of our being. It's our nervous system. It's the root of our evolutionary development, very literally the channel through which not just our life force, but all of our nervous system travels. So there's a million movement modalities out there, my friends, a million different philosophies and ways to look at moving and coordinating the body. However, if we were to define one foundational principle that I believe they could all agree on that might unify these different perspectives on movement, it's the importance of prioritizing your spine. And this is why our hips matter so much. As a wise movement philosopher once said, those hips don't lie. That's one of my favorite movement dad jokes. I'm sure you've heard it before. So when we're talking about our hips, right, what we need to be aware of is our pelvic tilt, which is the ability for our hips to either tuck under or tilt back. Most people have a natural tendency one direction or another, right? people with scoliosis, they might be too externally tilted back. Sometimes you get that Instagram booty when they really want to pop it out a little bit too much. On a psychosomatic level, this leads to a very open sexual energy because you're really exposing this base of your pelvis where all of our sexual vitality stems and flows from. Whereas if you tuck your hips underneath you, you become a tight ass. I'm sure you've heard that expression, don't be a tight ass, right? And we have these idioms because there is deep, an idiom is like a saying that we repeat culturally, it gets passed around. However, a lot of times we don't think about it. Why do we say don't be a tight ass? It has a relationship to a certain way that people hold their posture. And when you're a tight ass, you actually bring in a certain psychological, emotional element to your being through the way you're holding your body, and vice versa. So, you don't want to be a tight ass, and you don't want to be the Instagram booty model, right? What you want is a balanced relationship between the two. So for first, imagine like you just have a pole going through your hips, and let's just practice that pelvic tilt. Tuck your hips under, tilt your hips back. Tuck your hips under, tilt your hips back. And what we want to do is we want to find that middle ground in between, balanced on both sides. And this is going to be a common theme that you're going to notice as we go through alignment. Proper tensioning is a balancing act. It's a push and pull from both directions evenly. And the word for this is tensegrity. Buckminster Fuller coined this term. It's tensional integrity. We can talk about that more a little bit later, but for now, let's review from the ground on up. We want our feet directly underneath our hips, straight lines. We want the outer edges of our toes in line with our heels. We want a little bend of our knees so our knees aren't locked or too bent, and we want our hips tucked to a neutral. From there, we're going to begin to learn how to create internal tensioning. The way to do this to start is I'm gonna ask you to try to rip the floor apart. So imagine you're pressing down through your feet and tearing out through the ground like you're trying to rip the floor in two. As you do, you should feel the outsides of your legs begin to come online and engage. Do you feel that? If you don't, I'm gonna challenge you. Rip it a little bit more. Tear the floor in two and feel those legs start to grow. Okay, good, relax, you got that. Awesome. Some degree of that rip of the ground is what I'm going to ask you to maintain as we go through the rest of this alignment stacking process. It doesn't need to be 100% for now, but just a little bit of engagement, right? From here, we're just going to practice lengthening through our crown. There is muscles that run up your back. They're called erectors. And what they do is they extend your crown to the sky. So if you imagine from the top of your head, you got a big horn and you're trying to punch it up through the ceiling, what you're gonna feel is the vertebrae of your spine start to lengthen and extend. This is very crucial because one of the biggest problems with our spine is compression. And that comes again from the fact that gravity is always trying to crush us down. So engaging your body with expansion allows you to fight against that force. Let's try it. Back in this neutral posture, standing, ripping the floor apart, hips tucked to neutral, lengthening through your crown. Try to get tall. Now, we want a proper balancing of our chin. We don't want our chin too tucked. We don't want our chin too up because, again, this neck is an extension of your spine going up. So find almost like you have an apple balanced underneath your chin. And then from there, again, lengthen as tall as you can through your crown and feel your spine begin to extend and feel the vertebrae start to open. Very good. Next up, we're going to take our hands and we're going to turn our thumbs open. The reason for this is you'll notice when you externally rotate that thumb, you start to open your shoulder. And what this does is by extension, open your heart. You know, they often say in life, you got to keep your heart open, but they don't talk about what that means. And I'll tell you one thing, in our society nowadays, the odds are stacked against us. We're all at our computers, we're hunched over, we got our phones, and they're all pulling us forward and in. So one big key, one big hack to fight against that and actively begin to train yourself to have an open heart is just to turn those thumbs open. It's so simple, right? From there, let's try to find a Vitruvian man stance. So like 45 degrees, you know the image I'm talking about? From there, turning your thumbs open, spreading through your fingers, and then I want you to reach. Reach long through those fingers like you're trying to touch through the floor. And we're gonna do all of those alignments that we've gone over again from the top all together, as much as you can for just a few seconds, okay? So, from the ground, we want our feet underneath our hips. We want our heels in line with our toes. We want a little bend of the knees. We want our hips tucked to neutral. We're gonna rip the floor, or tear it, and then start to grow tall through your crown. Take your hands, turn the thumbs open and back, reach them to the ground. And we're gonna do all of that at once, as much as we can, okay? Ripping the floor, tall through the crown, reaching those fingers, ripping the floor, tall through the crown, reaching those fingers, rip, reach, grow more, rip, reach, grow more, rip, reach, grow, and relax. Whew. So what you should have felt, if you did that right, is your body started to engage with a bunch of what we're gonna call tension. Tensional engagement, muscular recruitment. There's a lot of words for it, but we're gonna use this word tension because when you are able to put your body in a state of tension, you are now being intentional, right? So what is the difference between moving through the world intentionally and holding your body in tension? Well, I'm here to tell you, my friends, they are actually one and the exact same thing. So I'll give you an example. Let's say my intention is I am not going to eat cake. How do I have to do that? I need to literally control the tension of my hands from reaching for the cake and putting it in my mouth, and the tension of my mouth from chewing and swallowing. Controlling your body is the only way you control anything in this world, right? So, being in tension equals intentionality. We have this negative relationship with the word tension. We tend to think about it as a like a constrictive, contractive property. But the reason we do is because that tension is not being harmoniously distributed through the system, right? So if the tension congeals at one point, that is the chi getting stuck. You need to learn how to move that tension. Just like if you are intending to do something, but it's not helping you move forward in a proper way, it can lead to disharmony in your life, right? We need to balance. If my intention is to make these epic hero training videos, but to do that, I don't sleep, I don't eat right, I don't take care of my body, I don't nourish my relationships, this will start to become a point of imbalance, which will eventually degrade the quality of my original intention. So tension is a blessing. Tension is what allows us to stand upright and face the world. If you don't want any tension in your life, go be a jellyfish, guys. You didn't incarnate into this body to have no tension, but to know how to manage it intentionally. Okay, so this integrity we're talking about, where does this come into play? We've learned how to intentionally hold our body. If I have a goal, for example, let's say I want to pick something off of the ground, but I want to do it while maintaining this neutral spine alignment. If it's too heavy and I have to round in order to get it done, what I have just done is compensate. And this is a very important word because compensations are at the root of what it means to live integral. This compensation is you allowing yourself to draw from or bend at certain areas in order to achieve an external goal. Let's go back to the original example I was talking about. Let's say I really want to get rich. That's my goal. But in order to do, and then a friend of mine leaves a big bag of money sitting there. And I'm like, I can just take this money. I just compensated my relationship. I just compensated a moral that might say that that's wrong, right? So the end goal cannot come at the expense of compensation. And we all do this to some degree. Micro compensations are somewhat unavoidable. However, when you continue to compensate over time, what happens is you eventually start to embed those patterns into your being. And when you embed these patterns of compensation into your being, you start to solidify imbalances. And this is why sometimes people are leaning to the right, or sometimes they got pain in their back and things hurt on them. It comes from this continually repeated compensation to the point that your body starts to ingrain and remember it, and it shifts the actual physical structure of who you are as a person. So this is why when we train, we need to do it in a way that not just is integral to our body, but also creates more integrity in the ways that we operate within the world. So how do we do that? First, we prioritize internal alignment over external goals. I'll give you an example of what I mean. So let's say I really want to do a pull-up, right? But I don't have the shoulder capacity to get my arm to this degree. What I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to borrow from my spine, from my hips, so that I can get this angle to pull. And again, that can lead to spinal compression, which over time can perpetuate different problems. How do we align, and what are the compensations that commonly occur? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to review some of the basic patterns of movement that we commonly see people doing in the gym, and just review the compensations that tend to occur throughout. So the first thing we'll talk about is that spinal alignment priority I was discussing earlier. Now, what does it mean to have your spine aligned? It doesn't necessarily mean straight, because the human spine has a natural curve to it. So how we can define that spinal neutrality is we can take a straight object and we can reference 3 points: the back of the head, base of the skull, in between the shoulder blades, and then right here at the bottom of the hips. So I'm going to use this steel mace, but it could be anything that is straight, to attach to those 3 points: back of the head, shoulder blades, back of the hips, right? Now, if I can maintain those 3 points as I hinge, I am hinging with integrity. The second that I start to lose 1, 2, or all of those points, I have now compensated with my spine in order to do that movement. So I invite you to try this at home. If you can find just something that is long and straight, a broom handle, a stick, whatever you got, go ahead and take that, put it behind your back, connect it to the back side of your head, your shoulder blades right here on your hips, one hand on either side, and you're going to do this hinge. Your hinge is just your ability to tilt your hips while keeping your spine connected, right? We know this often as a deadlift or a kettlebell swing. This is very common in like most forms of exercise movement. So try it. See if you can hinge all the way down and all the way up without losing those 3 points of contact. What you're going to find as you do is, as you reach the bottom, there might be a point where you can no longer go any lower without starting to borrow from that low back. You've now discovered the end depth of your hinge, right? As you're doing this, it is important to ask, where is the tension? Where is the intention supposed to go, supposed to flow in my structure as I move through this pattern? Well, what's happening is as we press our hips back, are lengthening the whole back side of our body. We'll get deeper into that in the future. So as I press my hips back, you can think of it like a bow and arrow, right? Imagine a bow getting pulled, and then boom, that pull back of that line of fascial tension is what creates the explosive power of my hinge. So where you should feel the tension is a lot in your hamstrings and a lot down the calves, so that as you get pulled back, it's nice and tight, nice and taut, and then that tightness, that can give you that explosive tilt of your hips underneath you. This is really crucial because this is where all of our power comes from. There's a reason your butt is the biggest muscle in your body. It is what generates all of your explosive force. So if you're doing a deadlift or a kettlebell swing or a clean, it all comes from that load back of the hamstrings and that tuck and bang of the glutes up and under. Make sense? Another common point of compensation that often occurs is something that we touched on earlier, which is this relationship between our spine and our hips. Did you know there are 3 layers to your core? We're going to quickly review them. The deepest most layer is known as your transverse abdominis, and it wraps all the way around to your low spine. That is what controls your ability to push your belly out, big belly, or suck your belly in. And that serves a very important function that we will touch on at a later date. But that's the deepest first layer of your core. The second layer of your core is your six-pack, your rectus abdominals. And that is actually there to control this relationship between your rib cage and your hips. The third is your obliques. They wrap around from side to side. They are the roots of all athletic potential. Today, I want to focus on that frontline connection, right? That connection of your hips to your ribs through your six-pack. So, how we can practice this. Find your neutral stance again, my friends. Take a second, check in. Are your feet underneath you in alignment? Do you have the outer edges of your feet in line with each other? Little bend of your knees, tall through the crown. Take your thumb to the bottom of your rib cage, middle finger to your bottom of your hips. And I want you, without anything else moving, because we don't want to round, we don't want to borrow from the spine, all we want to do is tuck the hips to the ribs in order to connect this line. And now open it up, open the diamond. All right, you'll see your hips start to round. Tuck and connect. Open the diamond. Tuck and connect. Open the diamond. Practice that. Now this, what we call frontline connection, is a compensation that occurs in two directions. Anytime you are reaching your hands overhead, like I said, if you don't have the shoulder capacity, which I'm kind of lacking in, you'll borrow in order to get there. It also happens with your legs. The third one, this comes into play oftentimes when we are pulling, right? And this is our scapular connection, right? So it's not that you want your shoulder blades squeezed back like so. This is something that coaches often teach and preach that actually can be detrimental over time because, again, it's a proper push and pull. The scaps are a little complicated. You don't want them all the way pulled back all the time. You don't want them always rounded forward. You don't want them all the way down or all the way up. You want them back, up, out, all directions at the same time. And you want to be able to keep that positioning as you rotate. I'm getting a little advanced. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Hope you guys are tracking. Feel free to ask any questions in the comments. I would love to clarify any of this stuff for y'all. So our scap, which is this big bone in the back, connects our shoulder to the rest of our body. If your scap is protracted, which means it's coming out, you are now disconnecting your arm musculature from your back musculature. You see this muscle? This is your lat. This should be your main muscle that pulls things towards you. But if you disconnect, you are now got a lot weaker, because you're only pulling with your arms. You don't have your back connection to pull with. And you'll see people do this all the time in the gym, right? They'll be doing rows, and at the bottom of their rep, the shoulder is just disconnecting. Shoulder is disconnecting. Whereas, you know, if you keep that connection as you go up and down, you are maintaining your arm's connection to your back through the whole movement. There's nothing wrong with protracting your scap if you know what you're doing and it's intentional and it has a purpose, but there is a problem with not having the awareness and unconsciously compensating because you don't understand the way that your body functions. So we got scap connection, we got frontline connection, we got spinal neutrality. These are the basics of what we do oftentimes in the gym. I cannot emphasize enough how important it is that if you notice these compensations starting to occur in your movement, you stop, you slow down, and you try to find balance. Slowing down on our eccentrics is key. When I say the word eccentric, what I mean is the negative of the motion. So more specifically, whenever the force is pulling us, if we're doing anything where the force is just gravity, the eccentric is down. So for your squat, the way down is your eccentric, your way up is your concentric. Big words you don't need to remember, but just remember this, slow on the down. However, if you were doing a pull-up, it'd be the other way. This would be your concentric, this would be your eccentric, right? The problem that a lot of people face is that they just let themselves drop on their eccentric. They drop, they explode. Drop, explode. What happens when you do this is you blow past all of the checkpoints along that range of motion. So if you imagine as I'm squatting, right, it's like there's a billion infinitesimal stopping points along the way, right? So here, 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 here. At each of those stopping points, there might be a compensation or an imbalance occurring. But when you just drop through them, you just blow past them. And on the explosive, you do the same thing. What happens is you never give yourself an opportunity to correct and to fix those imbalances. So by slowing down, you have an opportunity to be like, oh, at this point I start to lean. Okay, fix that, slow, okay. Slowing down, all right, at that point I start to do this, okay, find that correction. And then over time, through doing it slowly, you can rectify these imbalances so that when you do it fast and explosive, it's integral. In life, you can think about it like this. Let's say I want to run a marathon. I'm gonna have to slow things down a little bit. Let's say I want to get jacked. I may have to slow things down a bit. I may have to find where are the weak points in my daily habits? Where are the imbalances in the way that I am moving towards that objective? And by slowing down and rectifying those imbalances, over time you will actually get a lot farther. This is how we build a sustainable transformation. This is how we truly embody this end goal that we want to see. Otherwise, what ends up happening is, yeah, I'm gonna run a marathon. You get 2 feet out the door, you injure yourself, you burn out, you can't sustain it long term. Maybe you do run the marathon once, you never do it again, you start going back to binging, all your goals fall to the wayside. So slow things down. Find those points of imbalance. Build strength at those compensation points so you can move through the world with more integrity. And this is how we train for integrity. Thanks for joining me on episode 2 of Hero Training. In the future, we're going to be putting these principles of integral training in the dojo to actually push. So I recommend you come ready to work next time I see you. We're laying the baseline of foundational principles because I don't believe in throwing things at people arbitrarily. With my one-on-one clients who I train, I always make sure that they understand this deeper why behind what they're doing. We are going to be building in intensity as we go forward on top of these foundational understandings and principles so that all the heroes that we train rise together, rise wisely, and it's not just hard effort, but it's intentional hard effort.